London, just after the Second World War. Amid rows of soot-stained brick houses in Notting Hill, one ordinary address concealed unimaginable horrors. Number 10. Rillington Place looked like any other rundown London building, but inside lived a serial killer whose crimes would shock the nation and expose deep flaws in Britain's justice system. John Reginald Christie appeared to be an unremarkable, middle-aged man, a war veteran and former special constable. He was soft-spoken and seemingly helpful to his neighbours. Yet, behind his polite demeanour, Christie was a predator. Between 1943 and 1953, he murdered at least 8 people within the walls of his home. John Christie was born in 1899 in Halifax, Yorkshire. As a young man, he served in the First World War and survived a mustard gas attack that left him temporarily unable to speak. After the war, he married Ethel Simpson and struggled to settle. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, Christie served several prison sentences for theft and assault. By 1938, he and Ethel had reunited and moved into the ground-floor flat at 10 Rillington Place in London's Notting Hill. The neighbourhood was a run-down, working-class area still recovering from the war. The Christies lived quietly, and John, despite his troubled past, gave little outward sign of the darkness to come. In August 1943, with London in the midst of war, Christie committed his first murder. He strangled 21-year-old Ruth Furst, a munitions worker whom he had lured to his flat, and then buried her body in the narrow back garden. A year later, in October 1944, he killed again. This time, his victim was 31-year-old Muriel Eady, a co-worker. Christie devised a cruel method. He tricked Muriel into inhaling domestic coal gas, carbon monoxide, on the pretext of a medical cure, rendering her unconscious, and then strangled her. He concealed Muriel's remains alongside Ruth's. At the time, these crimes went undiscovered. Just 2 more missing persons in wartime London. In 1948, 24-year-old Timothy Evans and his 19-year-old wife, Beryl, moved into the top-floor flat above the Christies at 10 Rillington Place. They were a young working-class couple with a newborn daughter, Geraldine. Money was tight, and the tiny flat had few amenities, but they hoped to make a life there. John Christie, their quiet neighbour downstairs, soon befriended them. To the Evans family, Christie appeared kind, knowledgeable, and willing to help, a welcome older friend in a difficult time. By 1949, Beryl was pregnant again and desperate not to have a second baby they could not afford. Abortion was illegal in post-war Britain, but Christie volunteered to assist with an abortion in secret. In November 1949, while Timothy Evans was away at work, Christie took Beryl into his kitchen under the guise of performing the procedure. Instead, he poisoned or gassed the young mother to render her unconscious, then strangled her to death. With Beryl's body in the flat, Christie also strangled 13-month-old Geraldine, likely to silence the only witness to her mother's murder. When Timothy Evans returned home later, Christie spun a lie to cover his tracks. He claimed that Beryl had died accidentally during the abortion, and that, to avoid trouble, they should hide the facts. Christie reassured Evans that the baby was still alive and promised to arrange for Geraldine's care or adoption. He urged the distraught husband to leave London for a few days to let things cool down. Believing Christie's story, the grief-stricken Evans travelled to Wales to stay with relatives. Racked with guilt and confusion, Timothy Evans went to the police a few days later, on the 30th of November, 1949. At first, he repeated Christie's tale, that Beryl had died in a botched abortion, and claimed he had disposed of her body in a drain. The Metropolitan Police searched 10 Rillington Place, but initially found nothing where Evans said. Suspecting foul play, detectives interrogated Evans aggressively. The young man, who was illiterate and easily intimidated, became muddled under pressure. Eventually, the police obtained a written confession, dictated in language far more complex than Evans ever used, in which Evans supposedly admitted to killing his wife and daughter. In January 1950, Timothy Evans was put on trial at the Old Bailey for the murder of his baby daughter Geraldine. The prosecution chose to try only that charge. John Christie was a key witness, calmly denying Evans's accusations and presenting himself as a concerned neighbor. The jury, hearing the confession and Christie's testimony, found Evans guilty. In March 1950, 25-year-old Timothy Evans was hanged at Pentonville Prison. He went to the gallows protesting his innocence. At the time, the case seemed straightforward to the public, a tragic domestic crime solved. No one realized that the real killer was the mild-mannered John Christie, sitting in the witness box, or that two of Christie's earlier victims lay buried just yards away in the garden. After Evans's execution, Christie remained at 10 Rillington Place, and he kept on killing. In December 1952, he murdered his wife of nearly 30 years, 54-year-old Ethel Christie, strangling her as she slept in their bed. With Ethel gone, Christie had the house to himself. Between January and March of 1953, he claimed 3 more victims: 25-year-old Rita Nelson, who was 6 months pregnant, 26-year-old Kathleen Maloney, and 26-year-old Hectorina McLennan. Christie lured each of these women to his home on some pretext and then exploited their trust. He rendered his victims unconscious by releasing domestic coal gas into the room, then strangled them with a rope. After each murder, he wrapped the woman's body in cloth and hid it in a small alcove behind the kitchen wall. Christie then covered the alcove with wallpaper. The tiny flat at 10 Rillington Place had become a tomb hidden in plain sight. By March 1953, Christie's sins were closing in on him. He had quit his flat on 20th March, fraudulently subletting it to another couple before vanishing. Just a few days later, the new tenant, a man named Beresford Brown, went into Christie's empty kitchen to install a shelf. Noticing a section of wallpaper that seemed oddly bulged, Brown pulled it back. To his horror, he uncovered a narrow hidden alcove containing the bodies of 3 women. Brown alerted the police, who arrived at 10 Rillington Place and conducted a thorough search. At last, the full scale of Christie's crimes was revealed. In addition to the 3 women in the alcove, officers found the corpse of Ethel Christie beneath the floorboards of the front room. They also dug up the garden and unearthed skeletal remains, the long missing bodies of Ruth Furst and Muriel Eady from 1943 to 44. 6 victims in total had been concealed at the address. The ordinary terraced house on Rillington Place was now a grisly crime scene that shocked the nation. A citywide manhunt was launched for 54-year-old John Christie. His photo filled the newspapers as Scotland Yard searched. Christie himself wandered through London, sleeping rough in parks or staying in cheap lodging houses under a false name. He was finally spotted on the morning of 31st March 1953, near Putney Bridge, looking dishevelled and alone. A police officer recognized him and promptly arrested him. The long reign of terror at 10 Rillington Place had come to an end. In custody, Christie quickly confessed to a string of crimes. He admitted to murdering the women whose bodies were found in his flat and garden, and also acknowledged killing Beryl Evans, Timothy Evans's wife. However, he continued to insist that he had not murdered baby Geraldine. Christie was charged with multiple counts of murder, though authorities decided to prosecute only one at trial, that of his wife, Ethel. Christie's trial began in June 1953. In the same court where Evans had been tried 3 years before, he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Christie's lawyers described him as mentally disturbed, but the court found little evidence to support an insanity defense. After hearing gruesome testimony and Christie's own rambling statements, the jury took just 85 minutes to find him guilty of his wife's murder. The judge sentenced Christie to death. He did not appeal. On the 15th of July, 1953, John Christie was hanged at HM Prison Pentonville, executed by the same hangman who had dispatched Timothy Evans 3 years prior. Christie was buried in an unmarked grave within the prison walls, as was customary for executed criminals. The revelation of Christie's crimes cast grave doubt on the conviction of Timothy Evans. Almost immediately, there were calls to re-examine the Evans case. In 1953, the Home Secretary ordered an official inquiry, but after a brief review, the inquiry report upheld Evans's guilt, a conclusion that many found unconvincing, given Christie's confessions. Public pressure to clear Evans's name only grew. Over the next decade, journalists and MPs persistently highlighted the case as a terrible miscarriage of justice. Finally, in 1965, a second, more thorough inquiry was convened. High Court Judge Sir Daniel Brabin re-examined the evidence from both the Evans and Christie cases. His report concluded that Christie had most likely killed Geraldine Evans and that Timothy Evans had played no part in either murder. As a result, the government granted Timothy Evans a posthumous pardon in 1966. Evans's name was legally cleared, though by then he had been dead for 16 years, and his remains were reburied away from the prison grounds. The British justice system had formally admitted its tragic mistake. The case of 10 Rillington Place had a profound impact on British society. It starkly illustrated the fallibility of the criminal justice system, showing how police errors and false confessions could lead to an innocent man's execution. Public faith in the police and courts was shaken. Along with a few other infamous cases of the 1950s, the Christie-Evans saga helped turn the tide of opinion against capital punishment. Politicians frequently cited Timothy Evans's wrongful hanging during parliamentary debates. In 1965, the UK passed legislation to suspend the death penalty for murder, and this suspension became permanent a few years later. The horrors of 10 Rillington Place were a key factor in the abolition of the death penalty in Britain. The scandal also spurred reforms in police procedures. It highlighted the need for more careful investigation and collection of evidence. For example, thorough crime scene searches that might have caught Christie earlier. It underscored the danger of relying solely on confessions without corroboration, especially when suspects like Evans could be coerced or misled. In subsequent decades, changes such as taped interrogations and improved forensic methods were slowly implemented, in part to prevent future miscarriages of justice of the kind that had occurred at Rillington Place. Today, 10 Rillington Place no longer exists on the map. The street was later renamed and the house itself demolished, but its dark legacy endures. The story of John Christie and Timothy Evans remains one of Britain's most notorious true crime cases. It serves as a chilling reminder of how a serial killer managed to hide in plain sight, and how the failure of the justice system led to an innocent man's execution. In the aftermath of these events, important lessons were learned and changes made so that such a tragedy may never occur again. The tale of 10 Rillington Place continues to haunt the public conscience, a stark testament to the value of truth and the price of its obscurity. If you found this documentary informative, consider liking the video. It helps the channel reach others who value careful, factual storytelling. If you'd like to see more long-form investigations into real British cases, you can subscribe to the channel. New documentaries are released regularly. And if you have thoughts on this case, or others you think deserve careful examination, feel free to leave a comment below. Thank you for watching.